November 1841. The night began with a scream, a sailor's scream, cut short. A knife flashed in the lantern light. A body collapsed onto blood-slicked planks. The stench of salt mixed with iron. For a moment, the sea itself seemed to pause. The ship creaked, the waves rolled, but every ear strained to the sound of death. Then came silence. A terrible, heavy silence. And in that silence, something impossible had begun. Men in chains had risen. The Creole would never be the same. The slave ship Creole cut through the Atlantic, bound from Richmond, Virginia to New Orleans. To its owners, it carried cargo worth a fortune, 135 enslaved men, women, and children. Their bodies were numbers on a ledger. Their pain, profit. To the crew, it was another job. Watch the slaves. Feed them just enough to survive. Beat them when they resisted. Deliver them alive and strong to the market. Collect payment. Drink away the memory. Before we continue with the video, kindly drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is over there, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. But to the captives, the Creole was a coffin. The hold was a pit of misery. Dark. Airless. The stink of sweat, blood, and waste pressed down like a second skin. Rats scurried along the beams. Chains rattled with every movement. Men lay shackled together, their skin rubbed raw where iron bit into flesh. Women huddled in corners, clutching children or staring into the dark, their eyes hollow. Above, sailors stomped their boots, laughed, and cursed. Below, silence ruled. A silence carved by years of endurance. But silence does not mean surrender. Not here. Not now. The people chained in the Creole's belly were not nameless. They had lived. They had loved. Some came from Virginia's tobacco fields, where dawn meant the whip cracking and dusk meant hunger. Others had toiled in cotton, their fingers raw and bleeding, their backs striped with scars. They had seen families torn apart at auction blocks where laughter mingled with sobs. They had seen children dragged from mothers, husbands ripped from wives. One by one, they had been sold to traders, chained in coffles, and marched to Richmond. Some prayed for mercy, some prayed for death, but all endured. And endurance, though silent, is dangerous. Among them was Madison Washington. Born enslaved in Virginia, Washington had once escaped. He had fled north, his feet blistered from miles of running, his heart pounding with each step. He had crossed into Canada. There, he had breathed free air. He had worked. He had earned. He had lived as a man. But he had not forgotten. His wife was still enslaved, and love pulled him back into danger. He returned to rescue her, but he was captured, forced aboard the Creole. Yet something in him refused to break. His eyes held fire. His voice carried strength. In the suffocating dark of the hold, he whispered to the others. "They can chain our hands," he murmured, "but not our will." Life aboard the Creole was a slow torture. Food was thrown to them like scraps. Spoiled meat, hard biscuits, barely enough to keep the body alive. Water was rationed. Bowls passed from mouth to mouth until lips cracked with thirst. The crew mocked their suffering. They cursed them, laughed at their prayers, and beat them for amusement. But the worst came at night. The sailors descended into the hold with lanterns and leers. Women were dragged above deck. Their cries returned with them. Silent after, their faces turned to stone. Shame, rage, helplessness, the ingredients of rebellion. On November 7th, the voyage entered its second week. The seas were rough. The air grew heavier, hotter, and foul. The smell in the hold was unbearable. That night, a sailor lashed a captive for no reason but boredom. The man collapsed, groaning, his back split open. The crew laughed. Something broke inside Madison Washington. Enough. That night, in the choking dark, whispers passed from lip to lip. "We cannot endure this. We must act. If we fail, we die. If we do nothing, we die anyway. Washington spoke last. His voice was calm, low, but fierce. We wait until midnight. We take them by surprise. Their knives will be ours. Their guns will be ours. This ship will be ours. Eyes glimmered in the dark. Fear, hope, rage. The decision was made. Midnight. The ship rocked gently, lanterns swaying, shadows dancing. A guard sat near the hold, half drowsy, a pistol at his hip. He never saw the hands that reached for him, never felt the blade until it was buried in his throat. His scream tore into the night, then gurgled into silence. Chains became weapons. Shackled fists struck skulls. A sailor's jaw cracked. Another's pistol was wrenched away. Blood sprayed across the deck. Screams split the air. Washington's voice thundered. Now, for freedom. The crew scrambled. Pistols fired. Smoke filled the deck. A captive fell, chest torn open by lead. Another staggered, bleeding from his arm. But the enslaved moved like shadows, furious and unstoppable. They had endured too much, too long. A sailor was hurled overboard, his screams swallowed by the sea. Another's skull cracked against the mast. The deck became a battlefield. The Creole shook with violence. The night air reeked of gunpowder and blood. By dawn, it was over. The crew lay defeated. Some dead, others wounded. The survivors herded together like cattle. The enslaved held the weapons. The ship was theirs. The Atlantic stretched endlessly around them. The horizon glowed with dawn. For the first time, the captives stood on deck without chains. They breathed the salt air. The taste of freedom was sharp, mingled with blood. Washington stood at the helm, pistol in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. Not America, not New Orleans, but Nassau, the Bahamas, British soil, where slavery had been abolished. They had risked everything, and they were not yet free. The sea was treacherous, the crew still dangerous, but the silence had been broken. The revolt had begun. The deck of the Creole was smeared with blood. The air stank of salt, sweat, and death. The ship was theirs now. But freedom was still an illusion, fragile, flickering, like a candle in the wind. Men and women emerged from the hold, blinking into daylight for the first time in days. Some wept. Some fell to their knees, pressing their hands to the blood-stained planks. The sailors, now prisoners, huddled against the railings, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. One of them whispered, "We're finished." Another spat back, "Not yet. They don't know how to sail." The captives heard the words, and fear mingled with victory. They had the weapons. They had the numbers. But the sea was a merciless master, and few among them knew how to command her. Madison Washington stood at the wheel, tall, fierce, his hands steady. He had never sailed a ship of this size, but he carried himself like a man who had never bowed. His voice was the anchor. "We are not slaves anymore," he told them. "We are men. We are women. We are free." The words rolled over the deck like thunder. For the first time, the captives believed it. But belief would not guide them to safety. Below deck, the surviving sailors plotted. They whispered of taking the ship back, of waiting for nightfall, of cutting the throats of their captors in their sleep. The captives sensed it. Fear prickled their skin. A woman spat at the sailors, her voice sharp. "You called us cattle. Now you are the ones penned in." The sailors smirked, hiding their dread with arrogance. "You'll never make it," one growled. "The sea will eat you alive." Washington raised his pistol, the click of the hammer silencing them. "We'll see." A question haunted the deck. What to do with the crew? Kill them? Spare them? Some captives demanded blood. They remembered the beatings, the mockery, the nights of shame. They wanted revenge. Others hesitated. killing would stain their souls. It might doom them if caught. Washington listened. His face was stone, his heart a storm. In the end, only a few sailors were killed, those who had fought hardest, whose cruelty was carved deepest into memory. The rest were spared, forced into silence, their lives hanging by Washington's mercy. The ship rolled through waves, its sails straining. The horizon stretched endless, blue and merciless. Washington stood tall, but inside he carried the weight of every soul on board. Food was low, water lower. The winds could shift, the seas could rise, and at any moment the crew might strike back. Each decision could save them or damn them all. The days blurred together. Freedmen now stood guard, pistols in hand, watching the sailors with hawk eyes. The women moved across the deck, their chains gone, their steps lighter but their hearts still heavy. Children laughed for the first time since the voyage began. Their voices carried like fragile birdsong over the sea. But hunger gnawed, thirst burned, and every shadow seemed to whisper betrayal. Each night, as the stars filled the sky, Washington gathered them. Some begged to turn back toward Africa, to find their homeland, even if the seas devoured them. Others wanted to sail north to the free states, to risk America's laws, but to walk once more on familiar soil. Washington shook his head. In America, chains await us. Only one path gives us life. The Bahamas, Nassau, British soil. The word freedom hung in the air like a promise. But the sailors laughed when they heard it. You'll never make it. You don't know the seas. Washington silenced them with a glare, but doubt gnawed at him. On the fifth night, the skies darkened, winds screamed, waves rose like mountains. The Creole groaned, its masts creaking, its sails snapping in the gale. Men clung to ropes, their hands burning as salt spray blinded their eyes. Women held children close, whispering prayers into the storm. Washington stood at the helm, the wheel jerking in his grip. Rain lashed his face. The sea roared like a beast. For hours they battled. For hours they endured. Until, at last, the storm broke, leaving them soaked, battered, but alive. And in their survival, something hardened. If they could survive the storm, perhaps they could survive the world. The storm gave the sailors hope. They whispered of mutiny against the mutineers, of striking when exhaustion weighed heavy. One night they tried. A sailor lunged with a hidden knife, aiming for Washington's throat. But Washington was ready. He twisted aside, the blade grazing his shoulder. His pistol cracked, the shot echoing over the sea. The sailor collapsed, blood spreading beneath him. The rest froze. Their chance was gone. After that, the crew obeyed. Their faces masks of hatred, their silence sharper than knives. The captives kept watch day and night. No sleep without guards, no moment without fear. But above it all, the ship pressed forward, south, toward the Bahamas, toward hope. As days stretched into weeks, a strange calm settled. Some of the freed captives began to dream again, of walking in markets, free, of touching earth not stained by chains, of children growing up without whips at their backs. Washington himself dreamed of finding his wife, of holding her once more, of living as a man, not as property. But dreams are fragile things, and the sea is full of ghosts. Every night, the cries of the dead haunted them, the sailors' scream, the gunshots, the silence of those lost. Freedom had a price, and it was steep. One morning, a cry rang out. Land! The horizon shimmered with green, palms, shores, a harbor, Nassau. The word swept across the deck like fire. Men embraced. Women wept. Children laughed. But the sailors sneered. You think you're safe? The Americans will come for you. You'll see. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps not. For now, all that mattered was the sight of land. the Creole glided toward the Bahamas, toward freedom, toward fate. It drifted into Nassau Harbor under a pale morning sun. Its sails were torn, its deck still stained with blood, but its people stood taller. For the first time in their lives, the enslaved captives looked upon land not ruled by chains. Palms swayed in the breeze. Boats bobbed in the harbor. British flags rippled over the fort. The Bahamas. Freedom, or a new cage. As the ship anchored, word spread fast through Nassau. A slaver ship, but not in chains. A mutiny. Blood on the waves. Crowds gathered along the docks, whispering, pointing, staring. British officers rode out, muskets at their sides, faces stern. The law was clear. Britain had abolished slavery in 1834. To them, every soul aboard the Creole was free. But the Americans saw it differently. The Creole's owners in Virginia still claimed every man, woman, and child aboard as property. They demanded their return. To them, the mutiny was not rebellion. It was theft. Theft of lives. Theft of profit. Theft of power. And so, even as the captives breathed hope, the shadow of America loomed. British Marines boarded the ship. Their boots echoed on the planks. Their eyes scanned the faces of the freed, the fearful, the furious. Washington stood tall, pistol still at his side. He did not lower it. One officer, stiff in his red coat, declared, "On British soil there are no slaves." The words hung in the salt air. Some captives sobbed. Others laughed through their tears. For the first time, freedom was not a dream, but a declaration. But the sailors protested. "They're criminals. They murdered men. They'll hang for this." The officers silenced them. Murder, perhaps, but not slavery. Not here. The Americans raged. The British stood firm, and the captives waited, breathless, for judgment. The next days were a storm of law and politics. Washington and the leaders of the revolt were questioned. The crew gave testimony dripping with hatred. They called the captives savages. They painted the mutiny as butchery. But the British governor faced a choice: honor American demands or uphold British law. And the law was clear. Slavery was dead here. In the end, 128 of the captives were declared free. They stepped off the Creole, their feet touching sand as free men and women. The crowd cheered. Some fell to their knees, kissing the earth. But not all. 18 men, those accused of leading the mutiny, those with blood on their hands, were imprisoned. Washington among them. Freedom was a blade with two edges. For some, it cut the chains. For others, it carved new wounds. The freed captives wept as Washington was led away. He had given them liberty, yet his own fate hung in the balance. The trial gripped Nassau. American envoys demanded execution. They wanted blood to avenge their dead. But the British court weighed the truth. The mutineers had killed, but in pursuit of liberty. Was rebellion against slavery a crime? Or was it just as witnesses spoke? The sailors cursed them. The freed captives prayed. And in the end, the court ruled they would not be returned to slavery. Washington and the others were released. Freedom against all odds. News of the revolt spread like fire. Across America, slaveholders trembled. If men in chains could rise at sea, could they not rise on land? In the South, newspapers screamed of terror. They called it a massacre. They demanded harsher laws, tighter chains, stronger whips. But in the North and in Britain, the Creole became a symbol. Proof that the enslaved would not remain silent. Proof that freedom was worth blood. The name Madison Washington became a whisper of hope. A myth. A man who defied the impossible. The Creole Mutiny freed more enslaved people than any revolt in American history. 128 souls who walked into the sun, no longer property, but people. Yet its legacy was heavier than numbers. It showed the world that silence, even centuries deep, can be shattered. That endurance, though hidden, can ignite into fire. And that freedom, once tasted, will never be forgotten. Picture it. Washington standing on Nassau's shore, his chains gone, his eyes unbroken, the sea behind him, the horizon before him. A man who had been stolen, beaten, caged. A man who had risen, fought, bled. A man who had turned silence into revolt. The world would argue his name. Hero, murderer, rebel, myth. But to those who walked free from the Creole, he was one thing only: deliverer. And as the waves rolled on, the story of the Silent Revolt carried with them a story carved into history, a warning to masters, a promise to the enslaved. The silence was broken, and it would never return. They fought for freedom when freedom seemed impossible. Don't let their story be forgotten. And don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button so their legacy lives on.